The mare's scream cut through the Wyoming morning like a rifle shot, and Caroline Henderson felt herself airborne before she understood what was happening. The rocky trail rushing up to meet her with terrifying speed as her boot caught in the stirrup and twisted her body sideways into the unforgiving ground. Pain exploded through her left ankle the moment she landed, white-hot and blinding, stealing the breath from her lungs and turning her vision into dancing spots of black and gold. The chestnut mare bolted down the mountain trail, reins flying, spooked by what Caroline could only assume had been a rattlesnake hidden among the scattered stones and sagebrush that dotted the narrow path. She lay there gasping, trying to remember how to breathe, trying not to scream, trying not to think about how far she was from the ranch or how her father would react when her horse returned without her. The September sun was already climbing higher in the cloudless sky, promising another scorching afternoon despite the cooler nights that had begun to settle over the territory. It was 1878, and Caroline had been making this ride between her family's ranch and the town of Laramie for 3 years now, ever since her 20th birthday, when her father had finally stopped treating her like a child who needed an escort everywhere. She had been so proud of that independence, so confident in her abilities. Now she lay crumpled on the trail like a broken doll, her ankle already swelling inside her leather boot, and she could not help but think how quickly pride turned to foolishness. She tried to sit up, biting down hard on her lower lip to keep from crying out. The pain was extraordinary, radiating up her leg in waves that made her stomach turn. When she looked down at her boot, she could see it was already tighter than it should be, the leather straining. She knew enough about injuries from years of ranch life to understand that this was bad, possibly very bad. A sprain at best, a break at worst. Either way, she was not walking out of here on her own. The trail stretched empty in both directions, winding through the foothills of the Medicine Bow Mountains. Behind her lay another hour's ride back to the ranch. Ahead, perhaps 2 hours to Laramie, though she had been moving slowly this morning in no particular hurry. She had been bringing supplies to her aunt who lived on the edge of town, enjoying the solitude of the ride, the way the wind moved through the pine trees and carried the scent of wild grass and distant water. Now that solitude felt more like abandonment. The trail was not heavily traveled this time of year. Most of the cattle drives had already passed through, heading to the railhead. Prospectors occasionally wandered these paths and hunters, but they were unpredictable. She might wait hours before anyone came by. She might wait days. Caroline closed her eyes and focused on breathing, on staying calm. Panic would not help her. She needed to think clearly. She could try to crawl to some shade, at least get out of the sun that was growing stronger by the minute. She could try to remove her boot before the swelling made it impossible, though the thought of touching her ankle made her feel faint. She could call out, though the mountains swallowed sound and threw it back in strange echoes that went nowhere. She was trying to decide which option seemed least terrible when she heard it. The steady rhythm of hoofbeats on packed earth, coming from the direction of Laramie. Hope surged through her chest, sharp and almost painful. She tried to push herself up on her elbows, tried to see around the bend in the trail. "Help!" Her voice came out rougher than she expected, cracked from pain and fear. "Please, someone help me." The hoofbeats quickened, shifting from a walk to a trot, and then a rider came around the bend astride a tall buckskin gelding. Caroline's first impression was of someone who belonged to this landscape entirely, as natural here as the rocks and sage. He sat his horse with the easy grace of a man who had spent more of his life in the saddle than out of it, wearing a dust-colored shirt and dark trousers, a brown hat pulled low against the sun. As he drew closer, she could see he was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was strong-featured and serious, with eyes that took in the scene before him in one quick, assessing glance. He pulled his horse to a stop and swung down from the saddle in one fluid motion, ground tying the gelding with a quick wrap of the reins. Easy now, he said, his voice low and calm, the kind of voice used to soothing spooked animals. Do not try to move. Let me see what we are dealing with here. He knelt beside her in the dust, and Caroline found herself looking into eyes that were a startling shade of gray, like storm clouds over the mountains. There was competence in those eyes and intelligence and something else she could not quite name. Concern, perhaps. Kindness. My horse threw me, she managed to say, though she suspected that much was obvious. My ankle, I think it might be broken. Let me take a look. His hands were gentle as he examined her boot, not touching yet, just looking. I am going to need to remove this before the swelling gets worse. It is going to hurt, I am sorry for that. Caroline nodded, bracing herself. She had handled pain before. She could handle this. My name is James, he said, meeting her eyes. James Cartwright. I work on the Double R Ranch about 10 miles north of here. What is your name? Caroline Henderson. My father owns the Circle H. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, perhaps. Most people in this part of Wyoming knew of her father, Matthew Henderson, who had been ranching these lands since before the war. All right, Caroline, I need you to take some deep breaths for me. When I tell you, let the breath out slow. That is when I am going to pull the boot off. Understand? She nodded again, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. James positioned himself carefully, one hand supporting her calf, the other gripping the heel of her boot. Deep breath in, he instructed. She obeyed, filling her lungs. Now let it out, slow and steady. She exhaled and he pulled. The pain was ferocious, a living thing with teeth and claws that tore up her leg and exploded behind her eyes. She heard herself cry out despite her determination not to, heard the sound echo off the rocks and fade into nothing. And then the boot was off and James was setting it carefully aside and the worst was over. You did good, he said quietly. Real good. Now let me see what we have got. Her ankle was already swollen to twice its normal size, mottled with bruising that was darkening by the moment. James examined it with careful, practiced hands, his touch light but thorough. Caroline watched his face, trying to read his expression. I do not think it is broken, he said finally. Feels like a bad sprain, maybe some torn ligaments, but you are not going to be walking on it anytime soon. We need to get you off this trail and somewhere with proper shelter. He looked up at the sky, calculating. It is about 10 miles to my ranch, 15 or so back to yours. Laramie is closest, maybe 12 miles if we take the direct route, but that trail is rougher. The ranch, Caroline said immediately. My father will be worried when my horse comes back without me. James nodded slowly. That is probably true. But I am going to need to splint this ankle first, and I am going to need to ride double with you. My horse can handle it, but it is going to be a long day for all of us. Are you up for that? Do I have a choice? A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first hint of humor she had seen from him. Not really, but I thought I would ask anyway. He stood and walked back to his horse, rummaging in his saddlebags. He returned with a clean shirt, a canteen, and a leather case that looked like it might hold tools. Drink this first, he said, offering her the canteen. You need water, especially if we are going to be riding in the heat. Caroline drank gratefully, the water cool and clean. While she drank, James tore his spare shirt into strips, then walked around the immediate area gathering materials. He returned with 2 straight branches he had cut from a pine tree, each about 1.5 feet long and fairly smooth. He worked with quiet efficiency, positioning the branches on either side of her ankle, then wrapping them carefully with the cloth strips, creating a makeshift splint that was surprisingly sturdy. You have done this before, Caroline observed, watching his hands work. Grew up on a ranch in Texas, James said, not looking up from his task. You learn to patch up injuries when the nearest doctor is 2 days away. Lost count of how many times I splinted something for my brothers or they splinted something for me. Comes with the territory. He tied off the last strip and sat back, examining his work. That should hold until we can get you to someone who knows what they are doing better than I do. How does it feel? Terrible, Caroline admitted. But more stable, thank you. Do not thank me yet. Getting you on that horse is going to be the hard part. He stood and offered her his hand. Come on, let us get you up. Keep all your weight on your good leg, I will support you. Getting upright was an adventure in agony. Even with James supporting most of her weight, even with her keeping her injured ankle off the ground, the movement sent fresh waves of pain rolling through her. She swayed slightly and his arm came around her waist, steadying her. I have got you, he said quietly. Just breathe. She leaned against him, her head swimming, and became acutely aware of how solid he felt, how steady. He smelled like leather and sage and honest sweat, like the land itself. There was something deeply reassuring about his presence, a calmness that settled over her own racing panic. All right, she said after a moment. I am all right. They made their awkward way over to the buckskin, who stood patient and unmoving, as steady as his rider. James kept one arm around Caroline's waist while he gathered the reins with his free hand. This is Scout, he said. Best horse I have ever owned. He is not going to give us any trouble. Here is how we are going to do this. I am going to mount first, then pull you up behind me. You are going to need to hop on your good leg and use your arms to help. Think you can manage that? Yes, Caroline said, with more confidence than she felt. James released her for a moment, and she balanced precariously on one leg while he swung up into the saddle with easy grace. Then he kicked his left foot free of the stirrup and reached down to her. Give me your hands. Caroline gripped his forearms and he gripped hers in return. On three, he said. 1, 2, 3. She hopped up with her good leg, and he pulled, and somehow, through a combination of his strength and her determination, she found herself behind him on the horse, breathing hard and dizzy with pain but mounted. James helped her arrange herself, getting her settled with her injured leg positioned as comfortably as possible. You are going to need to hold on to me, he said over his shoulder. This is going to be a long ride and some of the trail is rough. I do not want you falling off. Do not be shy about it. Caroline wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt. Under different circumstances, such intimacy with a stranger would have been scandalous. Right now, it was simply necessary. I am ready, she said. James clicked his tongue and Scout started forward at a careful walk. The horse's gait was smooth, but even so, every step sent jarring discomfort up Caroline's injured leg. She bit down on the inside of her cheek and held on, determined not to complain. James had already done so much for her. The least she could do was endure the ride without making it worse for him. They rode in silence for a while, following the trail as it wound through the foothills. The sun climbed higher, and the day grew hotter. Caroline could feel sweat soaking through her clothes, could feel James sweating too beneath her hands. Scout plodded on steadily, never faltering, never shying despite the double load he carried. Tell me about your ranch, James said after a while, breaking the silence. Circle H, you said. That is right. We run about 2,000 head of cattle, some horses. My father started it 20 years ago, right after he married my mother. It was nothing but open range back then. He built everything from the ground up. Your mother, is she at the ranch? She died when I was 10, Caroline said quietly. Fever, my father never remarried. It has been just the two of us ever since, and the hands. I am sorry, that must have been hard. It was, she paused. What about you? You said you grew up in Texas. What brought you to Wyoming? James was quiet for a moment, and Caroline wondered if she had touched on something painful. But when he spoke, his voice was matter of fact. My father sold the ranch after my mother died. Split the money between me and my brothers and told us to make our own way. I had always wanted to see the mountains, so I came north. That was 3 years ago, been working on the double R ever since. Do you like it? The work, I mean? I do. It is honest work, hard work, the kind that lets you sleep at night, and the country up here is something different from Texas. Bigger somehow, if that makes sense. Like the sky goes on forever. Caroline understood exactly what he meant. She had lived her whole life under these skies and still sometimes felt dwarfed by their immensity, awed by their beauty. It does make sense, she said. They fell into silence again, but it was a comfortable silence now, the kind that did not need filling. Caroline found herself relaxing slightly against James's back, letting him take some of her weight. Her ankle throbbed in time with her heartbeat, a constant reminder of her injury, but the splint held firm and she was grateful for that. The trail climbed higher into the foothills, switchbacking up a steep slope. Scout's breathing grew heavier with the effort, but he never slowed, never hesitated. James spoke softly to the horse, encouraging words that seemed to give the animal new strength. Caroline marveled at the bond between man and horse, the trust that was so evident in every step. "How much farther?" she asked after what felt like hours. "About halfway," James said. "Maybe a little more. We are making good time, all things considered. How is your ankle holding up?" "It hurts," Caroline admitted, "but I can manage." "You are tougher than you look," James said, and there was approval in his voice. "Most city women would be crying by now." "I am not a city woman. I have been working cattle since I was old enough to sit a horse. Pain is part of the job. That it is." James shifted slightly in the saddle, adjusting his position. "We will stop for a bit when we reach the stream up ahead. Let Scout rest and get some water in all of us." "Sound good." "Sounds perfect." The stream appeared about 20 minutes later, a ribbon of clear water cutting through a small meadow carpeted with late-summer wildflowers. James guided Scout to the edge and dismounted carefully, then helped Caroline down, supporting her weight as she settled on a flat rock near the water. Her ankle was screaming now, the hours of riding having taken their toll, but she tried not to let it show on her face. James let Scout drink his fill, then brought the canteen to Caroline. "Small sips," he instructed. "We have got a ways to go yet." She obeyed, forcing herself to drink slowly despite wanting to gulp the entire contents. While she drank, James splashed water on his face and neck, then soaked his bandana in the stream and wrung it out. He brought it to Caroline and gently pressed it against her forehead, her cheeks, the back of her neck. The cool water was blissful against her overheated skin. "Thank you," she breathed. "You are welcome." He settled onto the rock beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "We should rest here for a bit. Scout needs the break, and so do you." Caroline nodded, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had been keeping her going was fading, leaving behind bone-deep weariness and pain. She closed her eyes for a moment, just intending to rest them, but found herself listing sideways. James caught her before she toppled over, his arm coming around her shoulders. "Easy," he said softly. "You can lean on me if you need to, I do not mind." Too tired to be embarrassed, Caroline let her head rest against his shoulder. He was solid and warm, and she could hear his heartbeat, steady and reassuring. They sat like that for several minutes, neither speaking, just breathing together and listening to the sound of the stream and Scout cropping grass nearby. "I should be mortified," Caroline said eventually. "Throwing myself at a stranger like this." She felt more than heard James chuckle. "You have a sprained ankle and have been riding for hours in pain. I think you are allowed to dispense with propriety for a bit. Besides, we are not strangers anymore. I would say pulling someone onto your horse and riding 15 miles together makes you at least acquaintances." "Acquaintances," Caroline repeated, smiling despite herself. "Is that what we are, for now?" There was something in his voice, some quality she could not quite identify. "Though I have got to say, this is not how I imagined meeting Matthew Henderson's daughter. You knew who I was." "Everyone knows the Hendersons. Your father is one of the most respected ranchers in the territory. I have seen you in town a few times, actually, though I doubt you noticed me. Just another cowhand in a sea of them." Caroline lifted her head to look at him, studying his face. He had a good face, she decided. Honest and open, with smile lines around his eyes and a mouth that looked like it was used to laughing. "I would have noticed," she said quietly, and felt heat rise in her cheeks as soon as the words were out. James met her gaze and something passed between them, some wordless understanding that made Caroline's heart beat faster. His eyes were so gray, so clear, she could see herself reflected in them. "We should get moving," James said after a moment, but he did not look away. "Still got a ways to go." Yes, Caroline agreed, but neither of them moved. It was Scout who broke the spell, wandering over and nudging James with his nose, clearly ready to continue. James laughed and stood, offering Caroline his hand. All right, I hear you, boy." Getting back on the horse was harder this time. Caroline's muscles had stiffened during the rest, and her ankle was so swollen now that even the slightest movement made her gasp. But James was patient and strong, and soon they were mounted again, Caroline's arms wrapped around his waist, her cheek resting against his back as Scout carried them farther along the trail. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as they rode through country that grew more familiar to Caroline with every mile. She recognized landmarks now: the lightning-struck pine that stood like a sentinel on the ridgeline, the rock formation that looked like a sleeping bear, the old line shack that had been abandoned for years. They were getting close to Circle H land. "Tell me something," James said, his voice carrying back to her over the rhythm of hoofbeats. "What were you doing out here alone? No offense, but this is not the safest country for anyone to be riding solo, man or woman." "I was taking supplies to my aunt in Laramie. She's getting older and cannot make the trip out to the ranch as easily anymore. I make the run once a month." Caroline paused. "My father does not like it, me going alone, but I hate being coddled. I am a grown woman, perfectly capable of managing a simple trail ride." "Until your horse throws you." "Until my horse throws me," Caroline agreed ruefully. "I suppose he will never let me hear the end of this. Fathers worry, it is what they do." James was quiet for a moment. "Though if you were my daughter, I would be proud of how you handled yourself today. Not many people could have done what you did. Not many people would have stopped to help like you did. Some men would have just kept riding, not wanted the trouble. Then they would be fools." James's voice was firm. "And cowards besides. You do not leave someone hurt on the trail. That is not how decent people behave." Caroline tightened her arms around his waist, a gesture of gratitude and something more. She was beginning to understand that James Cartwright was not like other men she had known. There was a core of decency in him, a fundamental goodness that showed in everything he did. The way he had tended to her ankle, the way he spoke to his horse, the way he had given her water before drinking himself. Small things, but they added up to something significant. The trail crested a final rise, and suddenly the Circle H spread out before them in the valley below. The ranch house was a solid two-story structure built from local timber, weathered by time and wind into a silvery gray. The barn and outbuildings clustered nearby, and beyond them stretched the corrals and pastures where cattle grazed in the late afternoon light. Smoke rose from the chimney, suggesting Cookie was already preparing the evening meal. "There," Caroline said, pointing. "That is home." She felt James nod. "Good-looking operation. Your father built something solid here." "He did." Pride filled her voice. "Someday it will be mine, and I will keep building on what he started." "I believe you will." They descended the slope toward the ranch, and it was not long before someone spotted them. A shout went up from one of the hands near the barn, and suddenly there was activity everywhere. Men appeared from various buildings, converging on the main house. And then Caroline's father was striding out onto the porch, his weathered face creased with worry that turned to confusion when he saw Caroline riding double with a stranger. James brought Scout to a halt in front of the house and called out, "Sir, my name is James Cartwright from the Double R. I found your daughter on the trail with an injured ankle. Her horse had thrown her." Matthew Henderson was down the porch steps in an instant, reaching up toward Caroline. He was a big man, made bigger by years of hard work, with iron-gray hair and eyes the same blue as his daughter's. "Caroline, what happened? Are you all right?" "I am fine, Pa, just a sprained ankle. My horse spooked at something on the trail, probably a snake. James here found me and brought me home." Two of the ranch hands helped ease Caroline down from the horse, supporting her weight between them. Matthew Henderson's face had gone from worried to thunderous. "Silas," he barked at one of the older hands, "fetch Doc Morrison from town. Tell him it is urgent." "Already on it, boss," Silas called back, heading for the barn at a run. Matthew turned his attention to James, who had dismounted and was standing beside his horse, dusty and trail-worn. For a long moment the rancher just looked at him, his expression unreadable. Then he extended his hand. "I am in your debt, Mr. Cartwright." "Thank you for bringing my daughter home safe." James shook his hand firmly. "No debt, sir. Anyone would have done the same, but you were the one who did it." Matthew glanced at Scout, taking in the horse's exhausted state. "That animal looks like he has been ridden hard." "Your ranch is north of here," you said. "You must have come miles out of your way." "About 15 miles, give or take, but Caroline needed help. That was more important than convenience." Matthew studied James with new intensity, and Caroline recognized that look. Her father was assessing him, measuring him against some internal standard. Finally, the rancher nodded. "You will stay for supper and the night. That is not a request. Your horse needs rest, and I suspect you do too. In the morning, I will make sure you have fresh provisions for your ride back to the Double R." "Sir, that is not necessary." "It is to me." Matthew's voice held a note of steel. "You helped my daughter when she needed it most. The least I can do is offer you hospitality. Besides," his expression softened slightly, "I want to hear the whole story of what happened, and Caroline needs to get off her feet, so you will stay and we will talk over supper." "Agreed." James glanced at Caroline, who was being supported by the two ranch hands, her face pale with pain but her eyes bright as she looked back at him. Something passed between them again, that same wordless communication from earlier. "Agreed," James said, "and thank you. Cookie." Matthew bellowed toward the bunkhouse. "We got company for supper, set another place." He turned back to James. "Tom, take Mr. Cartwright's horse to the barn, give him a good rub-down and extra grain, he earned it. Mr. Cartwright, you can wash up at the pump around back. Caroline, let us get you inside and elevated with some ice on that ankle." The next hour passed in a flurry of activity. Caroline was settled on the sofa in the parlor, her injured ankle propped on pillows with a cloth-wrapped chunk of ice from the ice house pressed against it. The cold helped with the swelling, though it made the injury ache in a different way. James was shown to the guest room to clean up properly, and when he emerged, he looked almost like a different person with the trail dust washed away. Doc Morrison arrived as the sun was setting, a cheerful old man with wire-rimmed spectacles and hands that were surprisingly gentle despite their weathered appearance. He examined Caroline's ankle with professional thoroughness, nodding approval at James's splint work. "Good job on this," he said to James, who was hovering near the parlor doorway. "Straight branches, even pressure, no circulation problems. You have done this before." "A few times," James admitted. "Well, you probably saved her from worse injury by immobilizing it so quickly." Doc Morrison wrapped the ankle in a proper bandage, working with practiced efficiency. "It is definitely a sprain, probably grade 2 based on the swelling and bruising. Could be some ligament damage. You are going to be off this ankle for at least 6 weeks, young lady, maybe longer. 6 weeks. Caroline sat up straight, ignoring the protest from her ankle. "Doc, I cannot be laid up for 6 weeks. There is work to do. The ranch does not run itself." "The ranch has been running for 20 years, and it will keep running while you heal," her father said firmly from his chair across the room. "You heard the doctor. 6 weeks minimum." Caroline opened her mouth to argue, caught James's eye, and saw the small shake of his head. He was right. There was no point fighting this. She subsided against the pillows with poor grace. "Fine, 6 weeks. Good girl." Doc Morrison patted her hand. "Keep it elevated as much as possible. Ice it regularly for the first few days and stay off it. I will check back in a week to see how it is healing. In the meantime, if the pain gets worse or you develop a fever, send for me immediately." After the doctor left, Cookie called everyone to supper. The Circle H hands ate in the bunkhouse, but Matthew insisted that James join him and Caroline at the main house table. Caroline had to be carried to the dining room by 2 of the hands, which mortified her, but her father would not hear of her trying to hop or hobble on crutches yet. Supper was a substantial affair. Thick steaks from their own cattle, potatoes, beans, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Caroline found herself ravenous despite the pain, and she noticed James eating with similar appetite. He had excellent manners, she observed, and knew how to make conversation without dominating it. "So, Mr. Cartwright," Matthew said, cutting into his steak, "tell me about the Double R. I know the brand but have not had much dealing with the operation. Tom Reeves still running it?" "Yes, sir." "He is a good man to work for, fair and honest, pays on time, does not ask more of his hands than he is willing to do himself." "High praise. What do you do there?" "Whatever needs doing, mostly. I started as a regular ranch hand, but Mr. Reeves has had me ramrodding some of the crews this past year, breaking horses, supervising branding, that sort of thing." Matthew nodded, clearly impressed despite himself. "That is good responsibility for a young man, shows he trusts you." "I try to be worthy of that trust." "How did you come to find Caroline this morning?" James set down his fork and took a sip of water before answering. "I was riding to Laramie to pick up some supplies for the ranch. I took the trail through the foothills because it is prettier if a bit longer. Heard her call for help and found her about a half-mile past Rattlesnake Ridge." "Rattlesnake Ridge," Matthew repeated grimly. "That is a tricky stretch of trail. I have told Caroline a dozen times to be careful through there. In fairness to your daughter, sir, a snake can spook a horse anywhere. It is not like they give warning before crossing the trail. She handled herself well, all things considered. Stayed calm, stayed smart." Caroline felt warmth spread through her chest at the praise. Her father looked between her and James, his expression thoughtful. "Nevertheless, I think Caroline's solo trips to town are finished. From now on, she goes with an escort." "Pa, that is not necessary. This was just bad luck." "Bad luck that could have gotten you killed if Mr. Cartwright had not come along. What if he had taken the main road instead? What if he had been a day later? You could have died out there, Caroline. Heat stroke, dehydration, infection, any number of things." Her father's voice was rough with emotion. "I already lost your mother. I will not lose you too." The table fell silent. Caroline felt tears prick her eyes, seeing the raw fear in her father's face. He so rarely showed vulnerability, so rarely let her see how much he worried. "All right, Pa," she said softly. "You are right. I will take an escort from now on." Matthew cleared his throat and turned his attention back to James, visibly composing himself. "I meant what I said about being in your debt, Mr. Cartwright. If you ever need anything, anything at all, you come to me. Understood?" "Understood, sir. Thank you." After supper, the two ranch hands carried Caroline back to the parlor sofa, where she was situated with her ankle elevated again and a fresh compress of ice. Matthew and James sat in the chairs near the fireplace, and Matthew brought out a bottle of whiskey, pouring 2 generous measures. Caroline was not included in this ritual, but she did not mind. She was content to lie there and listen to the two men talk, learning things about James she had not known before. He was 24, she discovered, and had been working ranches since he was 13. He could read and write, which was more than many cowhands could claim, having been taught by a mother who believed education mattered. He had 2 younger brothers, both still in Texas as far as he knew, though they had not corresponded much since the family split up. He had never been married, never even come close, too busy with work and too focused on building something for himself to think much about settling down. "A man needs land of his own," James said, nursing his whiskey. "That is what I am working toward. Saving every dollar I can, learning everything I can about running a spread properly. Someday I want to have my own ranch, nothing huge, just enough to make a good life. Run some cattle, raise some horses, maybe have a family." "That is a good dream," Matthew said. "This country needs men with ambition and work ethic, too many drifters and men without purpose. But it takes capital to start a ranch. Land is not cheap and cattle even less so these days." "I know, sir. But I figure another 5 years of steady work and careful saving, and I will have enough for a down payment on something small. Then it is just a matter of building from there." Matthew was quiet for a moment, studying James over the rim of his glass. What if I told you there might be a faster way to get what you want? James looked at him cautiously. I would be interested to hear about it, sir. The Circle H is a big operation. Too big for one aging rancher to run alone, especially now that Caroline is going to be laid up for weeks. I could use a good man to help oversee things, someone with experience and intelligence, someone I can trust. Matthew paused. I could use a foreman. Caroline felt her heart skip a beat. Her father had not had a foreman since old Pete retired 3 years ago. He had been handling that job himself, unwilling to give up the control. For him to offer the position to James, a man he had just met, spoke volumes about the impression James had made. James seemed to understand the significance of the offer. He set down his whiskey carefully. Sir, I am honored. Truly? But I have commitments to the Double R. I cannot just walk away from my responsibilities there. Of course not. I would not respect you if you did, but I could talk to Tom Reeves, explain the situation. I think he would understand and release you from your obligations. The position pays better than regular ranch hand work, and it comes with a house of your own, one of the line shacks we have fixed up nice. You would have your own space, your own savings growing faster, and you would learn everything there is to know about running a large operation. When the time came for you to start your own place, you would be more than ready. James looked over at Caroline, and their eyes met across the room. She could see the wheels turning in his mind, weighing the offer, considering the implications. She tried to keep her expression neutral, but inside her heart was racing. The thought of James staying, of seeing him every day, of him being part of the Circle H, made something warm and bright bloom in her chest. Can I think about it, sir? James asked finally. This is not a decision to make lightly. Of course, sleep on it. Talk to Tom in the morning if you like, but I meant what I said. You helped my daughter today, and you did it without expecting anything in return. That is the kind of man I want working beside me. The evening wound down after that, everyone exhausted from the long day. Caroline was carried to her bedroom upstairs, which required Matthew and 2 hands working together to navigate the stairs while keeping her ankle immobilized. It was humiliating and uncomfortable, and by the time they had her settled in her bed with pillows propped around her ankle, she was near tears from frustration and pain. Her father kissed her forehead, something he had not done since she was a child. Get some rest, sweetheart. Things will look better in the morning. But Caroline lay awake for a long time after he left, staring at the ceiling and thinking about James. She barely knew him, she reasoned with herself. They had spent one day together under extraordinary circumstances. It was foolish to think there was anything more to this than simple gratitude for his help. And yet she could not stop remembering the feel of his arms around her as he helped her up from the trail, the solid warmth of his back as she rode behind him, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the sound of his voice as he talked about his dreams. She could not stop thinking about how safe she had felt with him, how understood. Somewhere in the house, James was sleeping in the guest room, probably thinking his own thoughts about the day's events and her father's surprising offer. Caroline wondered if he was thinking about her too, and her cheeks heated at the thought. The night stretched on, and eventually exhaustion overtook her racing thoughts, pulling her down into restless dreams of trails and mountains and gray eyes that saw right through her. Morning came too early, bright sunlight streaming through her bedroom window. Caroline woke to find her ankle throbbing viciously, the pain worse than yesterday now that the shock had worn off. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it, gasping as fresh agony shot up her leg. There was a knock at her door, and then her father entered carrying a breakfast tray. Morning, sweetheart. Cookie made you eggs and toast. How are you feeling? Like I was thrown from a horse, Caroline said dryly, accepting the tray. How is James? Is he still here? He is. Was up early and already out in the barn helping with morning chores, even though I told him he was a guest and did not need to work. That is a good man, Caroline. The kind who cannot help but be useful. Caroline picked at her eggs, suddenly not hungry. Did he say anything more about the foreman position? Not yet. But I saw him talking with Tom Reeves this morning. Apparently, he rode over first thing to speak with him about it. That is a good sign, I think. Shows he is serious about considering the offer. The day crawled by with painful slowness. Caroline was trapped in her bed or on the parlor sofa, unable to do anything useful, going slowly mad with inactivity. Her father had assigned one of the ranch hands, young Billy Cooper, to help her with anything she needed, which was mortifying. She was not accustomed to being helpless. James spent the morning working with the hands, and Caroline caught glimpses of him through the parlor window. He moved with such easy confidence, she noticed, equally at home mending a fence as he was gentling a skittish horse. The men seemed to like him, responding to his direction without resentment. He had a natural authority that had nothing to do with bluster or aggression, and everything to do with competence and respect. It was early afternoon when James finally came to the house, knocking politely before entering the parlor where Caroline was stationed. He had cleaned up and changed back into his own clothes, and his hat was in his hands. "Miss Henderson," he said formally. "I wanted to say goodbye before I headed back to the Double R." Caroline's heart sank. "You are leaving? What about my father's offer? I talked to Mr. Reeves this morning. He was understanding about the situation and agreed to release me from my contract. But I need to work through the end of the week to help train my replacement and tie up loose ends. After that, if your father still wants me, the foreman position is mine." Relief flooded through her, so intense it left her lightheaded. "He will still want you, I can promise you that." James smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "I was hoping you would say that." He hesitated, then came closer, lowering his voice. "Can I be honest with you about something?" "Of course. Your father's offer was generous, more than I deserve, but that was not the only reason I am taking it." His gray eyes held hers, serious and intent. "I find myself very interested in getting to know you better, Caroline Henderson, if that is all right with you." Caroline felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she met his gaze steadily. "That is more than all right with me." "Good." James's smile widened. "Then I will see you in a few days. Try to stay out of trouble until then. I will do my best." He left then, and Caroline watched from the window as he mounted Scout and rode away, following the trail north toward the Double R. Already she was counting the hours until she would see him again. The next week was both the longest and shortest of Caroline's life. Her ankle remained painful and swollen, confining her to the house and making her dependent on others in ways that chafed at her independent nature. But the knowledge that James would be returning kept her spirits up, giving her something to look forward to during the long, boring days of forced rest. Her father had the old foreman's house cleaned and stocked with supplies, preparing for James's arrival. It was a solid little two-room cabin about a quarter-mile from the main house, far enough for privacy, but close enough to be convenient. Caroline found herself thinking about that house far too often, imagining James living there, wondering what it would be like to visit him there. True to his word, James returned to the Circle H at the end of the week, riding in just as the sun was setting. Caroline was on the porch, having convinced Billy to help her outside so she could watch the sunset, and her heart leaped when she saw the familiar figure on the buckskin horse. James smiled when he saw her, guiding Scout up to the porch. "Miss Henderson," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "You are looking better." "I feel better. The swelling has gone down some, though I am going mad with boredom being trapped in the house all day." "I can imagine." "You do not strike me as someone who enjoys sitting still." "I hate it," Caroline admitted. "But Doc Morrison says another 5 weeks at least before I can put weight on it." James dismounted and came up the porch steps, standing near her chair. This close, she could see the dust of travel on his clothes, the tired lines around his eyes. He had been working hard these past few days, she realized, trying to fulfill his obligations to both ranches. "Your father around?" he asked. "I should let him know I am here." "He is in the barn." "But James, before you go, I wanted to thank you again. For everything, I do not think I properly expressed how grateful I am." You do not need to thank me, Caroline. I am just glad I was there when you needed help. Still, if you had not come along, I do not know what would have happened. You saved me in every way that matters. Something flickered in his eyes, some emotion too complex to name. Then I am glad I took the scenic route that day. They looked at each other for a long moment, the evening air soft and warm around them, full of the scents of grass and dust and distant pine. Caroline felt the pull between them, that same magnetic attraction she had felt since the moment they met. It terrified her and thrilled her in equal measure. I should let you get settled, she said finally, breaking the spell. You must be exhausted, a bit, James admitted. But it is a good kind of tired, the kind that comes from honest work. He smiled at her, warm and genuine. I will see you tomorrow, Caroline. Sleep well. He left to find her father, and Caroline sat on the porch until the stars came out, feeling lighter than she had in days. James was here. He was staying, and the way he had looked at her suggested he felt the same pull she did. The next months unfolded in a pattern that became both familiar and precious. James threw himself into his work as foreman with the same quiet competence he brought to everything, and the Circle H flourished under his oversight. He was a natural leader, able to get the best out of the hands without resorting to shouting or bullying. He knew when to push and when to ease off, when to supervise directly and when to trust his men to do their jobs. Matthew Henderson watched all this with growing approval and something that looked like relief. He began delegating more and more responsibility to James, trusting him to make decisions about the ranch's operations. And as he did, Caroline noticed her father seemed to stand a bit straighter, to laugh a bit more easily. He was getting older, she realized with a pang. The ranch had been wearing on him more than he had let on. Having James there to share the burden was a gift. For Caroline, the enforced rest gave her time to watch James work, to learn his patterns and rhythms. She spent her days on the porch when weather permitted, ostensibly reading or doing needlework, but really observing the man who had come into their lives like a force of nature disguised as a gentle rain. He visited her every evening after the day's work was done, sitting on the porch steps or in the chair beside her and talking about everything and nothing. They discussed books they had read, places they wanted to see, dreams they harbored. James told her stories about growing up in Texas, about his brothers and his parents, about the early days when he had been learning to be a cowhand. Caroline shared her own stories, her memories of her mother, her love for the ranch, her ambitions for the future. I want to expand the horse operation, she told him one evening as they watched the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. We have always focused on cattle, but I think there is a market for good working horses. Ranchers always need mounts, and if we build a reputation for quality, we could sell them at premium prices. That is smart thinking, James said. Horses are more work than cattle in some ways, but the margins are better if you do it right. You would need someone who really knows horse training, though, someone who can gentle them properly and develop their skills. Someone like you mean, James grinned. I was not fishing for the job, but yes, someone like me. I have been training horses since I was 14. It is some of my favorite work, actually. Every horse is different, every one a puzzle to solve, and when you get it right, when you and the horse understand each other, there is nothing quite like it. Then maybe we should do it together. When my ankle heals and I can be properly useful again, we could start small, buy a few good mares, find a quality stallion, build from there. I would like that, James said quietly. Building something together, I mean, with you. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken possibility. Caroline's heart was beating too fast, and she could not seem to look away from James's eyes. James, she began, but he shook his head gently. Not yet, he said. You are still healing, and I am still new here. There are things that need time, Caroline, but I want you to know that I am not going anywhere. When the time is right, we will have this conversation properly. I promise you that. It was both frustrating and reassuring. Caroline wanted to rush forward, to seize what she felt growing between them and claim it immediately. But she also understood that James was right. Some things needed time to develop properly, to grow strong enough to weather whatever challenges came their way, so she waited. And as the weeks passed and her ankle slowly healed, she found that the waiting had its own sweetness. Every evening conversation was a gift. Every shared smile across the dinner table was a promise. Every time their hands brushed accidentally, she felt sparks race up her arm. 6 weeks after the accident, Doc Morrison declared her ankle healed enough to begin walking on it again, though he cautioned against too much activity too soon. Caroline took her first wobbly steps with James supporting her on one side and her father on the other, tears of frustration and triumph streaming down her face. "There you go," James said softly, his hand steady at her elbow. "You are doing great, just take it slow." "I hate slow," Caroline said, but she was laughing through her tears. "I know you do, but sometimes slow is what gets you where you need to go." Over the following weeks, Caroline relearned how to walk properly, how to put weight on her one singered ankle without flinching. James was there every step of the way, literally and figuratively. He walked with her every evening as she built up her strength and stamina, first just around the house, then to the barn, then eventually out along the trails she had ridden all her life. It was on one of these evening walks, as autumn was beginning to paint the aspens gold and the air carried the first hints of coming winter, that James finally broached the subject that had been hovering between them for months. They had walked farther than usual, out to a small rise that overlooked the ranch and the valley beyond. The sun was setting in spectacular fashion, layering the sky with shades of crimson and orange and deep purple. Caroline stood looking at the view, her ankle aching slightly but not unbearably, feeling more like herself than she had in months. "Caroline," James said beside her, his voice serious in a way that made her turn to look at him. He was watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. There was longing in his face and hope and something that looked very much like love. "I have been patient," he said, "and I have waited because I wanted to do this right, but I cannot wait any longer to tell you what is in my heart." He took her hands in his grip warm and strong. "I am in love with you, Caroline Henderson. I think I started falling the moment I saw you on that trail, hurt and scared but refusing to give in to either. And every day since then, I have fallen deeper." Joy exploded through Caroline's chest, bright and fierce. "James, I feel the same. I have been in love with you for months, just waiting for you to say something." He laughed, relief and happiness transforming his face. "Then I wish I had said something sooner." His expression grew serious again. "Caroline, I know I am just a foreman. I do not have land of my own or much money saved. But I am a hard worker and I am honest, and I love you more than I have ever loved anything or anyone. If you will have me, I promise I will spend the rest of my life making you happy. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Caroline said, the word coming out on a breath. "Yes, absolutely yes." James pulled her into his arms then, holding her close, and she wrapped her arms around his neck and held him just as tightly. They stood there as the sun sank below the mountains and the stars began to appear. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something real out of a chance encounter on a lonely trail. When they finally pulled apart, James framed her face with his hands. "I do not have a ring yet. I will get you one, I promise, the prettiest one I can find in Laramie, but I wanted you to know my intentions, wanted to say the words." "I do not need a ring to know you mean it," Caroline said, "though I will not say no to one eventually." She smiled up at him. "My father is going to be pleased. I think he has been hoping for this since the day you brought me home." "I hope you are right. I still need to ask his permission properly. He will give it, trust me." They walked back to the ranch house hand in hand, and Caroline's heart felt so full she thought it might burst. When they reached the porch, her father was waiting, sitting in his chair and smoking his pipe. He took one look at their joined hands and their glowing faces, and a slow smile spread across his weathered features. "About time," was all he said, but his eyes were suspiciously bright. James cleared his throat. "Sir, I would like to speak with you, formally, about Caroline." "I expect you would." Matthew stood and knocked out his pipe. "Come into my office. Caroline, you stay here. This is between men." Caroline wanted to argue, but James squeezed her hand and whispered, "Let me do this properly." So she subsided onto the porch chair and waited, her heart hammering, while James followed her father inside. They were in there for nearly half an hour. Caroline tried not to pace, tried not to imagine worst-case scenarios. But Matthew Henderson could be a stern man when he chose, and she knew he would not make this easy just because he liked James. Finally, the office door opened and both men emerged. James looked slightly pale but triumphant. Matthew looked satisfied. "Well?" Caroline demanded, unable to wait any longer. "He asked properly and I said yes," her father said. "You are engaged if you still want to be after I told him all the things about you that will make him a difficult husband." "Pa," Caroline felt her face flame. "Someone had to warn him you are stubborn as a mule and twice as ornery when you do not get your way." "And I told him I already knew that and loved her anyway," James said, grinning. He came to Caroline and took her hands again. "It is official. We are getting married." The engagement period was short by most standards, but felt appropriate for people who had fallen in love as quickly and completely as they had. They set the wedding for the following spring, giving them time to prepare and for James to finish saving enough money to feel like he was contributing properly to their shared future. Winter came to Wyoming with its usual ferocity, but the Circle H weathered it well. James proved his worth 1,000 times over during those hard months, working alongside the hands to keep the cattle alive through blizzards and bitter cold, making decisions that saved animals and prevented disaster. Matthew Henderson watched it all with growing confidence, increasingly comfortable with the idea of James eventually taking over the ranch entirely. "He is good for you," her father told Caroline one evening as they sat by the fire while James was out checking on a cow about to calf. "I have not seen you this happy since before your mother died, and he is good for the ranch too. I could not have asked for a better man for you." "I know, Pa, I am lucky." "So is he, do not forget that." As winter gave way to spring and the snow melted from the valleys, preparations for the wedding intensified. It would be a simple affair, held at the ranch with a traveling preacher officiating and a celebration afterward with all the hands and neighboring ranchers invited. Caroline made her own dress with help from the ladies in town, a simple but elegant gown of cream-colored silk that her mother's wedding veil would complement perfectly. James spent his free time fixing up the foreman's house, adding little touches that would make it more comfortable as a home for two. He built new shelves and a larger bed, installed a proper stove, even planted flowers in boxes outside the windows. Caroline helped when she could, though James insisted she not overdo it, still protective of her one singered ankle even though it was fully healed now. The wedding took place on a perfect May morning, with the mountains standing clear and bright against an impossibly blue sky. Caroline walked down a makeshift aisle in the yard on her father's arm, tears streaming down both their faces, toward the man who had saved her in every way that mattered. James waited for her in his best clothes, his gray eyes bright with emotion as he watched her approach. When she reached him, he took her hands and she saw that his hands were shaking slightly. She squeezed his fingers, offering reassurance and receiving it in return. The preacher spoke words about love and commitment, about becoming one flesh, about the sanctity of marriage. But Caroline barely heard them. She was too focused on James, on the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world, on the promise in his eyes that said he would love her and protect her and stand beside her for all their days. "I do," she said when the time came, her voice clear and strong. "I do," James echoed, and his voice was rough with emotion. And then they were kissing, and the assembled crowd was cheering, and Caroline's heart was so full of joy she thought she might float away. James caught her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing, and Caroline knew with absolute certainty that she had found her home, her partner, her forever. The celebration lasted well into the night, with food and music and dancing. James proved to be a surprisingly good dancer, guiding Caroline through reels and waltzes with easy grace. They were toasted and teased and congratulated until Caroline's face hurt from smiling. But finally, as the stars wheeled overhead and the party began to wind down, James took her hand and led her away from the noise and light, toward the little house that was now their home. Inside, he lit the lamps and then turned to her, suddenly shy. "Mrs. Cartwright," he said, testing out the name. "Mr. Cartwright," she replied, smiling. "That has a nice sound to it." "It does." He drew her close, his arms coming around her waist. "I love you, Caroline, so much it scares me sometimes. I love you too, and you do not need to be scared. We are going to build something wonderful together." "Yes, we are." They kissed then, long and deep and full of promise, and Caroline knew that this was just the beginning. They had a whole lifetime ahead of them, a lifetime of shared dreams and hard work and love that would grow deeper with every passing year. The months and years that followed were full of challenge and triumph in equal measure. Caroline and James worked side by side to expand the ranch's horse operation, starting with just 3 good mares and building from there. James proved to be a gifted horse trainer, able to gentle even the most difficult animals into trustworthy partners. Caroline handled the business side, building relationships with buyers and establishing the Circle H reputation for quality stock. Their partnership extended to every aspect of ranch life. They worked together during calving season, during roundups, during the endless maintenance that keeping a ranch running required. They made decisions together, supported each other through setbacks, celebrated successes as a team. The hands respected them both, seeing them as fair leaders who worked as hard as anyone. Matthew Henderson gradually stepped back from day-to-day operations, content to watch his daughter and son-in-law guide the ranch into its next chapter. He spent more time in town, courting a widow he had known for years, and eventually, to Caroline's delight, remarried. It was good to see her father happy again, to see him building a new life for himself. 2 years after their wedding, Caroline discovered she was pregnant. The news filled both her and James with a mixture of excitement and terror. They were going to be parents. They were going to bring a new life into this wild, beautiful, sometimes harsh world. It felt like the most important thing they had ever done. Their son was born on a snowy January morning, arriving early but healthy, with a powerful set of lungs and his father's gray eyes. They named him Matthew James, after both their fathers, and called him Matt. James cried when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed by the fierce protective love that roared through him. Caroline watched her husband with their child and fell in love with him all over again. He was a wonderful father, patient and gentle but firm when needed. He sang to Matt in the evenings, told him stories, carried him around the ranch introducing him to horses and cattle and wide Wyoming sky. 3 years later, they had a daughter, bright and fearless from the moment she entered the world. They named her Elizabeth Rose after Caroline's mother. Lizzie, as she was quickly nicknamed, had her mother's blue eyes and her father's stubborn determination. She learned to ride almost before she could walk properly, determined to keep up with her older brother. The years flowed by like water, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. The ranch prospered under James and Caroline's management, growing steadily without losing the core values that Matthew Henderson had instilled from the beginning. Fair dealing, honest work, respect for the land and the animals. These principles guided everything they did. When Matt was 10 and Lizzie was 7, they added another child to their family, another boy they named Daniel. He was the quiet one, thoughtful and observant, more interested in books and learning than his older siblings who lived for life outdoors. Caroline nurtured his intellectual curiosity, while James taught him that there was value in all kinds of knowledge, not just the practical kind. Matthew Henderson Sr. lived to see all three of his grandchildren grow into capable young people who knew the value of hard work and family. He passed away peacefully in his sleep at 78, content in the knowledge that the Circle H would continue long after he was gone, guided by people who loved the land as much as he had. The loss hit Caroline hard, but James was there to hold her through the grief, to remind her of all the wonderful years they had shared with her father, to help her celebrate his life rather than just mourn his death. They buried him on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with the mountains standing eternal in the distance, exactly where he had asked to be laid to rest. As Caroline and James themselves grew older, their love only deepened. They had weathered storms together, literal and figurative. They had survived droughts and harsh winters, market crashes and difficult births, injuries and illnesses, and all the small heartbreaks that come with living a full life. Through it all, they had remained partners in the truest sense, two people who had chosen each other and kept choosing each other every day. Their children grew up and made their own choices. Matt took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing the same natural leadership his father possessed. He married a schoolteacher from Laramie, a smart, kind woman who fit into the family as if she had always been there. Lizzie proved to have a gift for the horse breeding operation, taking it to new heights with her innovative ideas and fearless determination. Daniel went east to college, studied law, but came back to Wyoming to practice, staying close to the land and family he loved. Grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with new energy and laughter. James and Caroline watched the next generation grow up on the same land where they had built their life together, and they marveled at how quickly time had passed and how rich their lives had been. On their 30th wedding anniversary, James took Caroline back to the spot where they had shared their first kiss as an engaged couple, that rise overlooking the valley where he had proposed. They were older now, both showing gray in their hair and lines on their faces earned through years of sun and wind and laughter. But when James took her hands, just as he had 3 decades earlier, Caroline's heart still fluttered like it had when she was 21. "I would do it all again," James said quietly. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy, as long as I got to do it with you. Even the part where my horse threw me," Caroline teased. "Especially that part. That is where everything started. That is where I found you." Caroline reached up to touch his face, tracing the beloved features she knew better than her own. "You saved me that day, you know, and not just from being hurt on the trail. You saved me from a half-life. You gave me everything I never knew I needed. You saved me right back. Before you, I was just drifting, working toward some vague dream that did not have any real substance. You made my dreams real, Caroline. You made everything real." They kissed then, surrounded by the land they had worked and loved for 3 decades, the land their children and grandchildren would continue to work and love for generations to come. And Caroline thought about how strange and wonderful life was, how a single moment could change everything, how a chance encounter on a lonely trail could lead to a lifetime of love. Below them, the Circle H spread out across the valley, buildings and corrals and pastures full of cattle and horses. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys now, as their children and grandchildren made their own homes on the ranch. The operation was bigger than Matthew Henderson had ever imagined it could be, but it still held true to the values he had instilled, the principles James and Caroline had built upon. "We did good, did we not?" James said, following her gaze. "We did better than good. We built something that will last. We built it together." "Always together," Caroline agreed. "That is how the best things are built." They stood there until the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and rose, their hands linked and their hearts full. 30 years had passed since James Cartwright had found Caroline Henderson thrown from her horse on a mountain trail, but the love that had sparked between them that day burned as bright as ever. And as they walked back toward the ranch house, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together, Caroline knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single thing. Every joy, every sorrow, every triumph and challenge had been worth it because they had faced it all together. James pulled her close as they reached the porch, dropping a kiss on top of her head. "What are you thinking about?" "I am thinking about how lucky I am, how lucky we are." "Lucky my horse threw you mean?" Caroline laughed. "Lucky you came down that trail when you did. Lucky you stopped to help. Lucky you splinted my ankle and rode double with me all day even though you did not know me. Lucky you stayed." "That was not luck, Caroline, that was fate. We were always meant to find each other one way or another." "Do you really believe that?" "I do. Some things are just meant to be. You and me, this ranch, this life. All of it was written in the stars long before either of us was born." Caroline thought about that as they went inside, where their family was gathering for the anniversary dinner that had been planned. She thought about the choices they had made, the chances they had taken, the love they had built day by day and year by year. And she decided that it did not matter if it was fate or luck, or simply the result of two good people choosing to be good to each other. What mattered was that they had found each other. What mattered was that they had built a life together that was rich with meaning and purpose and love. What mattered was that when Caroline looked at James across the dinner table, surrounded by children and grandchildren and the evidence of a life well lived, her heart still skipped a beat. The evening passed in a blur of laughter and stories, toasts and tears and joy. Their children had arranged everything, and the celebration was perfect. When it was finally over and the grandchildren had been taken home and the house was quiet again, James and Caroline sat on their porch one last time, watching the stars wheel overhead. 30 years, Caroline said softly. "It feels like forever and no time at all." "I hope we have 30 more, James said, "though I will be grateful for whatever time we get. Every day with you is a gift, Caroline. Every day with you is an adventure," James laughed. "Even the boring ones, especially the boring ones. Though I have to say, life with you has never been particularly boring." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch settling down, the occasional lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through the grass. This was home, Caroline thought. This land, this house, this man beside her. This was everything she had ever wanted and more than she had ever dreamed possible. "Thank you," she said suddenly. "For what? For being exactly who you are, for loving me the way you do, for building this life with me." She turned to look at him. "For stopping on that trail 30 years ago and helping a girl with a sprained ankle." James reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together the way they had done thousands of times over the years. "Thank you for letting me help, for giving me a chance, for choosing me every day since." "Always you," Caroline said. "Only you. Forever you." And as they sat together under the Wyoming stars, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together, they knew that their story was far from over. There would be more adventures, more challenges, more joys to come. There would be more grandchildren to spoil, more sunsets to watch together, more quiet moments on this porch where they could simply be together. But whatever came next, they would face it the same way they had faced everything else for the past 30 years. Hand in hand, heart to heart, together until the end and beyond. Because some bonds once forged could never be broken. Some love once kindled burned forever bright. And some people, once they found each other, were simply meant to stay together for all time. The end.